Welcome to the Music Education Podcast. I'm Chris, of the Chris Woods Groove Orchestra, and this podcast is, well, one last time anyway, brought to you by the Soundstorm Music Education Hub. Now, don't worry, this isn't our last episode. In fact, this is a new chapter in our podcast journey. We've done almost 100 episodes, but we've always been supported and made possible by the wonderful music education hub Soundstorm. But they are now passing the torch to our new partners who are going to take us to the next level. They are Charanga, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I just wanted to take a moment to say a really heartfelt thank you to Soundstorm and Dan Samoji for supporting this podcast for so long and enabling so many, I think, quite frankly, powerful conversations. There's not really that many spaces that truly authentic, honest and open conversations exist around music education, and this has been a platform and continues to be a platform and will continue to be a platform for just that. And we couldn't have done it without that support from Soundstorm for so long. So thank you, Soundstorm, and thank you and welcome, Charanga. Really excited to be working with Charanga. I think someone who has the foresight to work on promoting open and authentic conversation around music education is an awesome partner. Now, in this conversation, I chat with Matt Griffiths. Matt is, well, a really, really fascinating guy, and plays an integral part in music education here in the UK. At the time of recording this, he was the CEO of Youth Music. He has recently decided to step down after 13 years of service. He really has a lot of insight, and he's great to chat to. I really think this is such a perfect episode to end a chapter of almost 100 episodes with Soundstorm, and to mark the beginning of a new chapter with our new partners, Charanga. I really hope you enjoy this episode, and I really hope that you'll stick around for the next episodes too. So please click subscribe or follow so that you can continue to be part of the conversation. Do you get that feeling? Do you sort of...
I think what can really help with this, which sounds like a really kind of obvious thing to say, is to start with young people. So really everyone involved in music education, focus on young people's lives. And that's a really great place to start for me, because that's ultimately why we're all here. And for me, like the good bit, music in young people's lives is their top favourite thing. And how do we know that? We produced this report last year at Youth Music called Sound of the Next Generation, interviewed thousands of young people about their attitude towards music, and they scored it their highest and top favourite thing in their lives. Mm-hmm. And when we'd done it 5 years before, it was the second favourite thing in their lives.
Ooh,
it was kind of joint favourite with gaming.
Okay.
So joint favourite with gaming 5 years ago, and then last year when we did it, their top favourite thing. So there you go. Young people love it. It's a way of self-expression. It's a way of expressing themselves, finding their identity, building communities, making friends, learning a craft, all those amazing things. So if you take that as a start point, okay, that's what we need to respond to. The flip side is young people's access to music, particularly if they face barriers and particularly if they're from marginalised communities, is getting really, really, really challenging. So if you have the wealth to take part in making music, you'll kind of be okay, because you've got the networks, you've got the parental support, and you can get involved. But there's a whole group of people who, through no fault of their own, face barriers to taking part. Because of who they are, where they live, what they're going through. And that's youth music's focus. But because of that situation, because of like the cost of living crisis, funding cuts, probably some disagreements in music education sometimes about what it's there for, all these things make it confusing for young people, but most importantly, their access is getting less. And the times we're in at the moment are really demonstrating that. So it's a game of two halves, really. Young people's appetite for music, making, listening, going to gigs, being online is huge. But the system that's there to support them across the UK is, really, really under pressure. And from a youth music point of view, we're all about addressing that and driving change and to make things better. So in terms of your question, yeah, I kind of completely agree with you. And I think there's a sense of exhaustion at the moment in the sector. Exhausted people, an exhausted workforce, but nevertheless passionate people who care so much about supporting young people. And I think you're right. Some of the narrative, particularly when you use the term music education, can drill down very quickly into schools. But what we're talking about really is, yes, that's important. But just remember, young people are making music in all sorts of amazing ways. And the young artists that we see coming through are amazing. But they might not often relate their music to what they had or they're being offered or not being offered in school. And there's a real disconnect. However, there's a massive opportunity as well.
What? Because it's not there to make it happen, sort of thing.
In terms of reimagining what that music curriculum in schools could look like. If you responded to that rapper or that producer or that DJ or that guitarist who loves music outside school and made it recognise that it's welcome in school as well, that it's welcome in the music department and they've got spaces to rehearse their bands after school, then suddenly young people's music is really acknowledged, and then young people don't see it necessarily as a different part of their life in music. They see it as a core part. That makes sense?
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I'm just mulling that sort of idea of when music that's owned by young people then becomes, look, we've made it part of the curriculum. We've put it in section. It's like, oh, dude, that wasn't the idea. Do you know what I mean? I was trying to rebel against you, and you formalised it into a paragraph.
Ah, I see.
Do you know what I mean? There is that sort of element of GCSE music formal qualifications of music being separate from music making, and that's okay. Maybe that's just the way it is as well, right? And maybe those although I think the opportunity is you could get the GCSE take up higher, and I'm convinced about this. I'd take a bet on this. If schools and education establishments really embraced young people's existing love of music. And I think if young people felt that, they're more likely to opt for GCSE. Okay, so validating what they're doing outside of school, at home, etc.
Yeah, and if it gives them a qualification as well, great. The curriculum for GCSE music isn't actually that long, and it has scope for a music teacher to really interpret it in a way that works for the school and young people. But it all too often gets described in such a way with language and the modern music curriculum and the types of music that should be in there that's a real sort of turn-off for lots of young people. Who in some cases also need to convince their parents that it's got value as well to do GCSE music. So I kind of see that as an opportunity. We did a massive 5-year study called Exchanging Notes a few years back at Youth Music, where it brought that love of music. The music curriculum was delivered by the music department, the head of music, with external music industry organisations. And on one level, it was really challenging because actually getting an understanding about what both were trying to achieve and do and their practice was really challenging. But once they'd got through that and put young people at the heart, The curriculum was dynamic, it was diverse. Young people were much more in charge of what they did in their curriculum. So the music department has to almost like relinquish control a bit. So rather than say to the young person, this is what you have to do, no, it's this, you do it like this. It's like, okay, what music have you got in you? And we can use that as part of your GCSE. And it became really, really dynamic. It was complex, but it particularly engaged young people who maybe found school and the whole idea of school, which is your point, as quite a struggle. But when they were acknowledged and sort of validated, and their music was validated, not only did their attendance at school in general increase, but their love of music in school increased too.
Okay. And what about, because you're a man who knows the sort of statistics, the researched bit. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you what proportion of sort of 14-year-olds play violin or something like that, but you're someone who looks into this. So what about the tangible barriers that relate to income specifically, as in you're from a super poor background? Why is that poorer people are not able to access music more now than previously, in a world where, you know, music education is accessible for almost free through a smartphone, for example?
Agreed. Yeah. I think it's like, it's really a lot about class. And, you know, class is not really one of those protected characteristics, and sometimes it doesn't get talked about enough. But actually, if you're from a working class background with less money to take part, to get travel to the gig, to get travel to your lesson, to buy the instrument, to update the instrument, to get a good teacher outside school, that's a considerable barrier. Because I think GCSE music is kind of predicated that you're doing music and you've got an affordability to be able to take part and like learn all your craft. So I think it's largely financial in that sense. And you don't have the networks available to you if you've got money compared to those who have money. So, yeah, I think it's largely a kind of financial issue. And, that, you know, the whole thing about music departments in private schools are, of course, well equipped. They've got all the latest equipment. They've got all the latest studios. It's part of the brand of the school. And young people attending those schools get immediate access. What we then see is then who is able to progress in music. It tends to become more for those that are privileged. And that's not their fault, don't get me wrong. You know, they have that opportunity, but there's a massive gap between those who have the opportunity and those that don't.
Yeah. It personally interests me to hear more about the school layer of it, because in the sort of, when you're a grown up and you're out in the big scary world, I can see that, and I'm really hyper aware of that from my own experience of being a musician and being able from I don't know what middle class or lower middle class or upper middle class or whatever term that would be, but my family had disposable income. So when I completely ballsed up, or when I decided to just completely obsess about the band I was in and not turn up for work because I had that ultimatum of come into work on Saturday or do the gig. I'll do the gig. See you later, mate. Because deep down, I know that I'm going to have a place to stay, or I'm probably going to get bailed out. That wasn't explicitly told to me every time, but my family aren't on the bread line, so to give me £100 wasn't a problem for them, whereas for so many others, and I can see that. I can see that more now when the best creative choices I make are usually the worst financial choices.
Of course.
And as I've got a little bit older and more personally financially secure, I'm able to go, I'm going to take that option, even though intrinsically I'm like, oh no, that's the safe even taking that safe financial option that is going to completely quash your ability to go out and do something creative and wonderful. But that financial freedom is just, when it comes to creativity, is so intrinsically linked. I don't actually, I almost can't imagine a world where how that wouldn't be a thing, unless like universal income or whatever. But how that functions when you're 14, 15 and making those options, I think is quite interesting. I wonder if people sort of, and I'm hesitant of doing this because it's not my own experience, but is that choice of, if you're from a background where everything's on that financial edge, then is it going to be a positive choice for you to be pissing about with music? Or is it going to be better that actually you're on a direct line to what we term as a secure job? Which,
right.
Do you know what I mean? Is that a thing, or is that my own little sort of imagination?
No, I suppose so. Like, universally, it's perceived that being a musician or getting a career in music requires and involves risk. So, of course it does. There's kind of real risk there. If there's slightly more money knocking around to provide that buffer, then maybe it's easier to take that risk.
Totally.
And get involved. But if there isn't, then it becomes the conversation about, and whether that's parental pressure, school pressure, carer pressure, you couldn't possibly do music, you need to earn a living. So there's this immediate perception that you can't make a living in music. But actually, as we know, on and off stage, there's so many careers in music for amazing young people who have the attributes of resilience and persistence and doing a good job and all those kind of things.
But it still takes financial risk, right? It still
takes financial risk. And yeah, it just reminds me, like, back in the day in Cardiff, I was brought up, I had a Saturday job in British Home Stores.
Oh, brilliant. In
the stock room. And I could earn more playing drums in a gig in a pub in Cardiff than I could working all day in British Home Stores. So I chose working in the gig, and I think I was ultimately sacked, actually, from British Home Stores anyway, because they thought I was scruffy. But I was like, well, I'm in the stock room, so I've got to look, I'm not going to wear, like, the finest clothes. But my point is, it was like, even then, there's kind of risk involved, because some would say, no, keep working in British Home Stores because it's regular. But fortunately, my parents were very much kind of, give it a go. But they could see the risk as well. And I remember those conversations like, we'll just have something to fall back on kind of thing. But actually what I fell back on was a portfolio career of teaching, running workshops, gigging, recording, and, that classic portfolio career, which is what started me out.
But you can't have been living paycheck to paycheck there as well, right? There must have been that family financial. I'm not trying to label your family class, but there must have been. If your family were on the breadline, then they probably would have said, I'd stick with British Home Stores, mate. Or maybe not.
You're right. And also my family, particularly in their lives, music was massively important.
Okay.
Never as a career, but as like something they did in their spare time. So the idea of music is an amazing thing. I didn't need to make the case on that. There wasn't really the buffer, but, I do remember, for example, my granny buying me a top-of-the-range drum kit, through some money she left her grandchildren. Do you know what I mean? So there were things like that helped. But I also remember the kind of feeling of, this is quite a risky business that Matt's going into, but they backed it. But yeah, in the scheme of things, they were always there, kind of thing, and I massively appreciate that. Yeah, and if you look at the industry in its wider sense now, who are the artists breaking through? Who are the artists making a career? There is that correlation sometimes that you'll see. They've had the benefit of coming from a background that has that buffer. Or they went to a school where it was, it goes without saying the music department was amazing. So I think I'm just really interested in that about, class and privilege as much as, and, the really important factors around gender, ethnicity, disability, and all those kind of things, described as protected characteristics. And when things are really, really tough, as they are in society and they are in music, you see those distinctions even more in terms of who's getting it, who's getting access to it and always will, and who is increasingly losing out. And the inequalities, for me, increase even more and are illustrated even more in a time of crisis.
Because if you're poorer, it's harder, essentially. It sort of amplifies all those things.
Exactly, because your options, if there's less funding around and government support around and subsidy around, then what can tend to happen is those young people are as equally as talented as anybody else, but don't have privilege and have barriers in their lives, tend to be the ones who lose out more. Look at COVID, look at the pandemic. It just exposed even more, whether that was early years children or whoever it was, that the inequalities were exacerbated and highlighted even more when COVID came out. And of course, it affected everybody. Of course it did. And, don't get me wrong. But it also, because lots of people couldn't go online. Their access to technology was much more limited compared to other people. So I think, when there's a crisis, these inequalities are revealed even more.
And what do you think of the thinking outside of the school element? Because I think, I don't know, I feel like sometimes the what's going to happen in schools element is so complicated and has to be so sort of holistic to fix. It's almost like a never-ending, well, obviously it's a never-ending conversation. But outside of that GCSE music, A-level music, what do you reckon are the solutions to sort of prop that up? Because so often the answer is just, more money, and that,
exactly,
and that for someone working in politics as well, that's impossible, right? We can't just keep fun, right?
Yeah. So, and that bit, the kind of outside of the school gate is the youth music bit, and it's why we've always existed, and that's the place where we devote most of our attention. So just by way of background, we kind of invest in about 350 grassroots youth organisations in the UK. We also support about 250 young creatives who are starting to make their living in music. So all told, it's about 100,000 young people.
Great.
And that's anything from early childhood, 0 to 5, right the way through to 18 to 25. And where this music and where they're going to make this music tends to be like early years centres, nurseries in the early childhood bit, and then into youth clubs, community recording studios, special schools, pupil referral units, young offender institutions, anywhere where music can make a particular difference. And that's the youth music territory, really. What's the situation for that part of the sector? It's pretty stark. We've got a campaign going on at the moment called Rescue the Roots, which we launched last week. 41% of those organisations at risk of closure. So we did a survey start of this year, and that's a 16% increase in what they said last year. So there is a sort of crisis for this sector. What we then see at Youth Music is huge number of applications to us for our support. We're having to turn down 83% of applications, which is like unprecedented in our 25 years. So really, really tough. So what's needed in the immediate term, we want to reduce the number of organisations at risk of closure, and Rescue the Roots is we're putting up £1 million from Youth Music's reserves to match donations and support from philanthropists, artists, foundations, the industry, to build that pot of money to support this really important sector, which often gets forgotten about because, as you said, the conversation can often very quickly lead to schools first. So that's where we're at. Now, what's required? I think particularly, yes, it is some, increased investment. I think it's the industry recognising, which they're beginning to, that these places are also socially and personally amazing for young people, because they're providing safe environments where young people are respected and acknowledged. And boy, do we need those safe environments at the moment in terms of places where young people go. And a byproduct of that is that these places are producing young artists who are going into the industry on and off stage. English Teacher being a great example at the Brits, came out of a youth music funded project called Music Leads. Ezra Collective, when Femi Spoke, came out of a youth music funded project. Tomorrow's Warriors, Audio Active, Connecticut Blocko, Laura Mavula in the past, Celeste, Little Sims. So there's this kind of irony that it's not the main aim for doing this, but the charity sector is producing these artists and these people to go into the industry. So for the industry to back this properly will help the next generation and will help the future of the music industry as well, because it's kind of already happening. But the investment from the industry in music and young people's lives is relatively small. If you get that bit right, collaboration, industry and education properly working together, you know, it's a section in the National Plan for Music Education, but it's not really being fulfilled. I think the government will then listen, because what the government want to see is this music education, music industry sectors working well together, you know, really properly collaborating around like shared goals rather than everybody doing their individual bit. Because you know what the sector's like. It's a very dynamic sector, but sometimes it's really fragmented. Mm-hmm. If you get all of that right, I think the government will then listen and get involved too, rather than us all individually going to the government cap in hand and going, you need to give us more money, which is true, because in real terms, there's been some really harsh funding cuts. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's about getting our act together as well as a sector by properly collaborating. And as I said at the right at the start, why? Because this is for young people. And if we focus on that, that's our reason for existing, young people's lives in music, then I think we can realise that we can do work better together.
So aside from, I mean, all that sounds absolutely wonderful and beautiful. Well, congrats on doing some really sort of tangibly good stuff as well. But aside from talking about sectors and organisations, I suppose, going back to Tramps Cafe and the Cooperage, and not just music venues in that sense, but pubs, churches, youth centres, because obviously I know that's still an organisational thing, but in my head maybe more of a historical sort of cultural thing that certainly has been around for a long time that doesn't exist in the same way. There is like this huge change, isn't there, in organic, incidental community. I mean, grassroots, yes, but I mean, just talking about music making for music's sake, that's just completely disappearing from our culture, isn't it? And it seems that, say, the wonderful work that you're doing is only it's almost unsustainable, isn't it, on its own? And I know you're talking about like bringing government in, but aside from government, isn't there sort of just, do you think there's just a cultural problem? I don't know if that's a UK thing or I think it might be a Western thing, actually. What do you reckon?
That's a really good question. I was chatting about this with another person about exactly the same topic. So I think that kind of societal point, the perception of the musician in society, I think, is the first thing I'd say.
Okay.
You know, you become a musician or you become a young artist, and the perception is, it's so wonderful for you. You must be so lucky to do something that you love. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely true. And, you know, I became a musician and I was really chuffed to be so. Mm-hmm. but actually it's sometimes perceived as so wonderful, it's forgotten about that actually musicians need to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to earn a wage. So it's positioned as this place of wonder, being a musician, but actually sometimes forgotten about what it takes and what needs to be in place for everybody to be able to experience music. So a workforce of teachers, of youth workers, a properly funded sector, an appreciation from the public who go to gigs, and they go to massive stadium gigs and have an amazing time. What it takes for those artists to be on stage and off stage, that recognition of the artist, if you see what I mean, not in a kind of self-indulgent way saying, look at me, look how brilliant I am. But I think it's just so many people would have loved to have been a musician as well. They think if you become one, it's like, well, everything's great for you because you do something that you love. But actually, it's really, really tough. You know, it's a really, really tough industry to kind of get buy-in, really.
But what about the wider music making thing, the non-musicians, the people who are just... Because that's the big part of music education as well, isn't it? It's not just creating musicians, not just creating poor people.
And actually for me that's fundamentally why we exist, the social and personal benefits of making music. If then the byproduct is some going to work in music, that's great, but the number one for me is the social and personal. So you're increasing confidence, you're increasing your self-esteem, your self-efficacy, all those things that music does. And I think that's increasingly understood, how making music and writing lyrics and expressing something that maybe you would find more difficult to express by having a conversation.
Do you think the general public
is
are getting
huge?
That? Do you think they're sort of...
I think they are. I think they're getting it more. You know, the number of campaigns you see where music has made a difference in somebody's life or a song that's been written. So the social and personal, you're absolutely right, is the overarching thing of, I think, why I do my job. As a byproduct, if some people then go into the business of music on and off stage, that's great too. But what it does in terms of like helping to address things in your life that kind of only music can do, by writing a banger tune with some amazing lyrics that go with it, that audiences then like to hear. But most importantly, it's given you an outlet. It's given you a creative outlet. In perhaps a way that you haven't had before. And I think music particularly does that. So, yeah, it's a good point you make, really, about never forgetting the kind of social and personal as much as the kind of the benefits for the kind of wider industry in the longer term.
Okay. Cool, man. Well, I guess it'd be nice to sort of wrap up, but it'd be nice to hear what your thoughts are, like an honest reflection of what you think is going to happen within music and music education, you know, in the sort of near term few years, because it is a pinnacle time, you know, with change of government, and then also culturally we're really at a point, aren't we, of venues disappearing. And I'm always fascinated by that experience of young people being in a band now and getting in a band, and they have a practice and they probably film that first practice and put it up on Instagram, you know, whereas when we were younger we would do that and you would be rehearsing for 6 months, and then you'd go and play in a pub and play to 20 drunk people, and that would be your first sort of, you know, that we're at this within the last 5 years, things have changed so drastically. So where do you think we're going to see the next few years? Do you think it's going to be more of that, or do you know?
Yeah. So I think currently, and the point you made at the start, that in some ways young people's access to music online has become greater than ever. So, you know, because you can get on somewhere online and make some music or have an online lesson or whatever it might be. So the benefits of like technology, and that's only going to increase, I think is like a really, really amazing thing. In terms of venues, though, the places where young people go to make music or to gig their music, yes, and, you know, Mark is looking at this completely directly about the number that are under threat. But I think there's an opportunity to bring together that local venue with the local youth club, with its local school, and for them to be a proper community hub whereby not just gigs are happening with visiting artists, but gigs are happening for and by and with young people. And it's a place to go where you can rehearse and gig your music. I think socially, one of the downsides of being online so much, it's not good for your soul.
Yeah.
And the amount of isolation it can lead to. So building scenes of music, scenes of young people, places where they can go and listen and make music and be safe is going to be even more needed. And I see a bit of a shift going on where actually going to somewhere in person, in real time, to have a creative experience is becoming more important now. And yes, you'll still have the online opportunity, but that shouldn't overly dominate. And why? Because I think humans being together in a space, having those celebratory moments and those amazing moments of music are really, really important. And I think without that, it could become increasingly kind of clinical, if you like, whereby you're getting an opportunity to make music, but you're not with friends, you're not with people. The challenge for venues, though, I think, is that young people are having to become a little bit more discerning about how they spend their time. Can they afford to go and see that gig? Can they get there? Is it safe when they arrive? Are security going to welcome them with open arms? Are there going to be alcohol covers for young people so their drinks don't get spiked? Is it going to be an inclusive space? Is it accessible? I think in some cases, venues need to raise the bar in terms of making their places really, really accessible and welcoming to, again, give young people the chance to say, yeah, I will go to that because I know the band on stage is going to be amazing, but I know I'm going to have a safe evening, and get them out of the house. So I think there's a kind of raising of the bar of the venues. Yes, they need to be protected and they need to be saved, but it's very easy to get nostalgic, as you kind of said, about that first venue that we all played in for 20 people and it was a sticky floor and everyone got drunk. But in some ways, those venues weren't also that great, in terms of being safe places.
Maybe we could do better.
Yeah, and because there's an appetite from young people to want to go to these things, but they're going to really want to feel they can A, afford it, and B, they're going to have a great night.
Fab. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate your time and thoughts.
That was wide-ranging, and it's Monday morning.
It's great, man. It's spot on.